I knew something was different the moment his truck pulled into my driveway. It wasn't just the way the late afternoon light slid across the hood, turning the faded silver into molten gold. It was him. Same broad shoulders, same dark eyes that always looked like they were in on a secret. But something in the way he leaned out the window, grinning at me, felt like a beginning. Or maybe an ending. I couldn't decide which. Rami had been in my life for 3 years, though friend always felt like a placeholder, too flimsy to contain the hours we'd spent talking, the trips we'd taken with my friend's group, or the quiet moments he and I had managed to carve out in between. He was my friend's cousin, technically a sheikh in his hometown, though here in our little coastal town, the title didn't follow him. Still, something about him carried that same quiet authority, the kind that made people lean in when he spoke. When he called 2 nights ago telling me to keep Saturday free, we're going fishing, I'd pictured the usual, coolers of soda, tangled fishing lines, the slow rhythm of the tide. But he didn't pull up with rods and tackle. Just that truck, his leather jacket draped over the passenger seat, and a knowing look that made my pulse stutter. "You ready?" he asked, voice low, like the question meant more than I realized. I climbed in, the cab smelling faintly of cedarwood and something warmer. Him. As he drove, the town blurred past and my fingers itched to adjust the dial on the radio, but I didn't. I didn't want to break the quiet, the way his presence seemed to fill every corner of the truck. We crossed the bridge out of town, the bay glittering beneath us, but he kept driving. Past the turnoff for the fishing pier. Past anywhere I'd expected us to go. "Thought we were fishing," I said lightly, though my voice came out thinner than I meant. His smile didn't falter, but his eyes flicked to mine, brief and unreadable. "We are. Just not the kind you're thinking of." The way he said it sent a shiver down my spine, though the sun was still high and the day was warm. I told myself it was curiosity. That's all. But my hands stayed clenched in my lap and I couldn't stop wondering where exactly this was going, both the road and us. We met by accident, at least for me. I'd gone with my friend Sammy to help unload boxes during his cousin's move into a small apartment above the bakery. I was sweaty, tired, and half focused on a crate of books when I heard someone say my name, rolling the R, like it belonged to another language. That was Rami. He had this way of speaking like he already knew you, like the conversation had been going long before you showed up. And for some reason I kept answering. Over the years, we'd become a sort of satellite orbit around the same group. Barbecues, camping trips, late-night drives where he'd hum along to songs he claimed not to know the words to. Fishing had been his idea, though not always in this mysterious, drive until the road runs out kind of way. We'd stood shoulder to shoulder on docks, comparing catches, pretending not to notice when our hands brushed as we reached for the same bait tin. He always made it a competition and I always let him win, though I never admitted that. Now, in the truck, the air felt thick with something unspoken. "So," I said, leaning back, "this mysterious non-fishing trip, should I be worried? Am I being kidnapped?" He glanced at me, the corners of his mouth lifting. "If I was kidnapping you, I wouldn't tell you where we're going." "That's comforting. You trust me." It wasn't a question, but it felt like one. I hesitated just long enough for him to notice, then said, "Most of the time." That made him laugh, warm and low, and I found myself smiling even though I was trying to stay casual. We'd been on the road for almost an hour when the complication arrived, though it didn't announce itself as one. The sky, bright when we left, was now patchy with thick clouds. By the time he turned off the main road onto a narrow dirt track, the first drops were hitting the windshield. "You checked the weather, right?" I asked. I like surprises. That's not an answer. The rain picked up, drumming against the roof. The truck jolted over a rut and my knee knocked against his. I meant to pull away but didn't. Neither did he. He parked at the edge of a wide field, the grass bending in the wind, a low line of trees in the distance. "We'll have to walk from here," he said, grabbing a small pack from the back seat. I looked down at my sneakers. "Great. What?" "My favorite." He smirked, pulling his hood up. "I'll carry you if you get stuck." I rolled my eyes, but my heart skipped at the casual way he said it, like it wouldn't be the first time he'd carried me. And maybe it wouldn't be the last. As we started across the field, the rain shifted from light to insistent, soaking through my jacket. My hair stuck to my forehead, and when I glanced at him, he was already watching me. Not in the teasing way he usually did, but softer, like he was memorizing something. I pretended not to notice, though the heat that rose in my chest had nothing to do with the weather. By the time we reached the tree line, the rain was relentless. Sheets of it blurred the horizon, and the wind whipped at my hood until I gave up trying to keep it up. My jacket clung to me like a second skin, cold water running down my spine with every step. "We're almost there," Rami said, his voice steady, like he'd done this 100 times before. Define there, I muttered, squinting through the rain. He pointed ahead, and through the curtain of water I saw it, an old wooden cabin, small and leaning just slightly, like it was tired of standing. It wasn't much, but right now it looked like salvation. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of damp wood and something faintly sweet like dried herbs. There was no electricity, just the soft gray light leaking in through warped window frames. He dropped his pack on the floor, shook the rain from his hair, and looked at me with that maddeningly calm expression. We wait here until it passes, he said. Great, I replied, though my voice betrayed my relief. My clothes were plastered to me, my shoes squelching with every step. He unzipped his jacket and tossed it onto a chair, revealing the dark sweater beneath, still dry somehow. You should take yours off, he said casually, not looking directly at me. I hesitated. It wasn't that I was shy exactly, but the idea of standing here half-dressed while he watched made my pulse trip over itself. Still, the cold was already setting in, and the logic of it was undeniable. I peeled off my jacket, trying not to notice the way his eyes flicked toward me and then away again, like he hadn't meant to look but couldn't help it. There was only one small bench by the window, and when he sat down and patted the space beside him, I considered pretending I was fine on the floor. But the bench looked warmer, and the rain outside was coming down harder, hammering the roof like it wanted in. I sat. Our knees touched instantly. It wasn't much, just a point of contact, but it might as well have been a live wire. I could feel the heat from his body seeping into mine, the faint weight of his arm brushing against mine when he shifted. You're quiet, he said after a moment. I'm cold, I lied. He chuckled. You're lying. I looked at him then and found his gaze already waiting for mine. There was no teasing in it this time, no deflection. Just something steady and searching, the kind of look that made me want to say things I'd spent years swallowing down. I broke the stare first, focusing on the rain. My chest felt tight, my mind caught in that dangerous space between wanting more and not wanting to lose what I already had. He leaned back slightly, one arm draping across the back of the bench, casual in a way that left his hand just behind my shoulder. I used to come here as a kid, he said, when I needed to get away from everyone. Why bring me here? His smile was small, almost self-conscious. Felt like you'd get it. Something in my chest cracked a little at that. A gust of wind rattled the window and the cabin creaked. Without thinking, I shifted closer and his arm fell naturally around me. Just a loose hold, nothing tight, but my heart slammed against my ribs anyway. We stayed like that for a while, listening to the rain. His thumb brushed the back of my shoulder once, maybe by accident. Or maybe not. I didn't dare ask. Every so often, I'd catch him watching me from the corner of his eye. And every time I told myself I was imagining it, that the warmth between us was just from the weather, that the way my pulse reacted to him was just because we were stuck here. But the truth was harder to ignore in such a small space, with nothing but the sound of rain and the scent of cedar and wet earth pressing in. And as much as I wanted the storm to pass, part of me was already wishing it would last a little longer. The rain had been falling for hours. At some point I'd stop tracking the time. It was just the two of us and the soft, endless percussion on the cabin roof, our bodies close enough that every movement felt amplified. A shift of his shoulder, a brush of my arm against his sweater, the faintest change in his breathing. I told myself I was fine like this, content to sit quietly, stealing warmth and pretending it meant nothing. But every minute made it harder to hold back. Rami had his eyes closed, head resting against the wall. His arm still lay across the back of the bench, fingers just barely brushing my shoulder. I wondered if he even noticed or if it was just me cataloging every detail like it mattered. Can I ask you something? My voice sounded rougher than I intended. He opened his eyes slowly. You can ask me anything. That was the problem. I hesitated, the words heavy on my tongue. Why'd you really bring me here? It's not for fishing, and you could have picked anyone to come along. He studied me for a moment, not rushing to answer. You notice things, he said finally. You see more than most people. I thought, maybe I could show you something I don't show everyone. Something about the way he said it sent a tightness through my chest. I wanted to push, to ask what exactly I was supposed to be seeing, but the truth was I already knew. Or at least I hoped I did. I turned to the window, watching the rain snake down the glass. My heart was beating too fast. You ever feel like you're standing right at the edge of saying something and you know it'll change everything but you can't decide if it's worth the risk? His gaze was so steady I could feel it even without looking. Yeah, he said quietly. I feel like that right now. That undid me. I swallowed hard, the words I'd been holding back for years rising before I could stop them. Rami, I stopped, hating how my voice caught. I tried again. You're not just Sammy's cousin to me. You never were. And if I've been acting like it's just friendship, it's because I didn't want to ruin what we already have. Silence stretched between us, thick and trembling. I couldn't look at him. Then I felt it, his hand warm and deliberate, covering mine. You think you're the only one who's been scared of that? I turned then, and what I saw in his expression nearly undid me all over again. He looked relieved. And terrified. And something else I didn't have a name for but had always wanted from him. I thought I was imagining it, he said. Every time you'd look at me like you were about to say something. Every time your hand would brush mine and you wouldn't move it right away. I kept telling myself not to make it weird. My laugh was shaky. You failed. He smiled faintly, but his thumb brushed over the back of my hand in a way that made my skin feel too tight. So what do we do now? I shook my head. I don't know. I just know I don't want to go back to pretending. Something shifted in him then, subtle but unmistakable. He leaned in, not enough to touch but close enough that I could feel his breath against my cheek. Then don't. For a moment, neither of us moved. I could hear my pulse in my ears, feel the heat radiating from him. And then, slowly, like he was giving me every chance to pull away, his forehead touched mine. It wasn't a kiss, not yet. Just that small point of contact, but it was enough to make the world outside fade. His hand came up to rest against my jaw, fingers curling lightly under my ear. You're freezing, he murmured. You're stalling, I whispered back. That made him laugh softly, and then he closed the space between us. The kiss was tentative at first, like he was testing the shape of it. But the moment my hand slid up to the back of his neck, he deepened it and the hesitation melted. There was nothing careful about the way I held him then, nothing cautious in the way his fingers threaded into my hair. When we finally broke apart, I was breathing hard and his forehead was still pressed to mine. Okay, he said quietly, as if answering a question I hadn't asked. That's worth the risk. I could only nod because my voice wouldn't work yet. We stayed like that, sitting on that creaky bench in the middle of nowhere, the rain still pounding the roof. And for the first time, I didn't care how long it lasted. For a while, neither of us moved. The air between us was different now, not heavier but charged in a way that made even the smallest movement feel like an echo of that kiss. His thumb was still resting lightly against my jaw, and I didn't want him to take it away. I can't believe I trailed off because saying it out loud made it sound like a dream I wasn't ready to wake up from. Kissed. His mouth tilted into that half smile I'd always hated for how much I liked it. You're going to have to get used to that. I shook my head, but I was smiling too. You're awfully confident for someone who made me wait years. You're awfully stubborn for someone who made me do the same. That earned him a soft punch in the arm, which he didn't even pretend to dodge. Instead, he caught my wrist and pulled me closer until my knees pressed against his. It was startling how natural it felt to be like this, no more pretending our closeness was accidental. His hand rested on the side of my neck now, fingers idly brushing the edge of my hairline, like he was learning the shape of me by touch alone. So, I said after a moment, what happens when we leave this cabin? He exhaled slowly, his eyes searching mine. We deal with it. Whatever it is. Sammy's going to find out, people might talk, but we deal with it together. The certainty in his voice made something loosen in my chest. You're sure? He leaned in, pressing a soft kiss to the corner of my mouth, quick but deliberate. I've been sure for a long time. I was just waiting for you to catch up. I laughed, quiet and disbelieving. You're impossible. Maybe. But you like me anyway. I didn't bother denying it. The rain had eased into a steady drizzle now, the sound softer, almost like a background lullaby. The bench was still uncomfortable, but I stayed there with him, leaning into his side. His arms settled around me properly this time, hands splayed against my back. We talked, about nothing, about everything. He told me about summers spent here as a boy, how he used to imagine the trees outside as silent guards. I told him how I always pretended I didn't mind losing our fishing competitions, just to watch how smug he'd get. I knew you were letting me win, he said, mock-offended. Not always. Liar. His fingers traced idle patterns against my back, and each small touch felt like a quiet promise. Eventually, I shifted to face him more fully. You know, we can't just go back to the way things were, right? Good, he said simply. I don't want to. Something about the way he said it made my throat tighten. Me neither. We didn't need to say much after that. I rested my head against his shoulder, breathing in the warm scent of him, feeling the steady rhythm of his chest rise and fall. Outside, the world was wet and gray, but in here, It felt like we'd stepped into a small pocket of time where nothing else existed. When he finally suggested we head back, I almost wished for another storm. But as we stood, he reached for my hand without hesitation, lacing our fingers together like it was the most natural thing in the world. And maybe now it was. The rain had stopped entirely by the time we reached the truck. The air was heavy with that clean green smell that only comes after a storm, wet earth, pine needles, and something fresh that made me feel like the day had been scrubbed clean. We didn't rush. He kept my hand in his even when the mud sucked at our shoes, even when I slipped a little and muttered about being too old for surprise hikes. He just smiled and pulled me closer like he'd been waiting years for this exact excuse. When we reached the truck, I paused with my hand on the door. If we drive back now, it's over. He leaned against the side of the cab, watching me with that unreadable softness I was starting to recognize. No, he said. It's just starting. The engine started with a low rumble, the heater kicking in almost instantly. I didn't realize how cold I still was until the warmth wrapped around us. He rested his right hand on the gearshift, and I let my fingers slide over until they covered his. He didn't even glance down, just squeezed lightly as if to say, yes, this is real. The drive back was quieter than the trip out, but it wasn't the awkward silence of before. It was comfortable, a shared space that didn't need filling. Now and then he'd glance at me like he was checking to make sure I was still there, still his. Each time, I'd meet his gaze and see that same flicker of relief. As we crossed the bridge into town, he slowed the truck, pulling over to the side. What are you? Shoo, he said with a small grin, nodding toward the water. The bay was calm now, the surface reflecting the pale gold of the late sun. Gulls wheeled overhead, their calls sharp in the stillness. Figured we should get at least one fishing memory today, he said, reaching into the back for a small folding rod I hadn't noticed earlier. You brought that the whole time? I asked, laughing. Plan B, he admitted, passing it to me. Go on. Your turn to win one. It was ridiculous. It was perfect. I sat on the edge of the truck bed, letting the line drift into the water, while he leaned next to me, shoulder pressed against mine. We didn't care if we caught anything. The point was the doing, the being here together. At one point he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small, smooth stone, the surface dark with water. Found it by the cabin, he said, holding it out. For you. I turned it over in my palm, the weight cool and solid. What am I supposed to do with it? Keep it, he said simply. So you remember where this started. I didn't tell him I didn't need a rock for that. The moment was already carved deep enough into me. When we finally packed up and headed back toward town, I noticed he hadn't let go of my hand since I'd taken the stone. And as the familiar streets came into view, I realized I wasn't worried anymore. Not about Sammy, not about what people might think, not about the thousand small ways this could get complicated. Because his hand was still there, warm and certain, and I knew I'd be holding it tomorrow and the day after, and for however long he'd let me. Which, if I had anything to say about it, would be a very long time.